When I first heard about the SHA-1 attack, my first initial reaction was, I have more questions. So it looks like some researchers from Google and a university in the Netherlands were able to find a way to get two PDF files to hash to the same exact SHA-1 hash. Again, in theory, we have had this sort of attack since around 2005, but no one had actually proven it out. If you can break a cryptographic hash, obviously you can impersonate, a file. You can use one file in the place of the other one, or you can fake a cryptographic signature on like a certificate or things like that.
So this is something that's been kind of theorized for a while. That SHA, I mean, we've been talking about depreciating SHA-1, and so this is a case where they're really doing something, taking it to the next level.
They took a PDF, portable document format. It's been around for years. Adobe created it a while back, I believe. And within that, they included a JPEG file, which is, image data. It's a picture of something. You've got this JPEG header. Like this is a JPEG inside a PDF, and that's how they managed to break it with this very controlled format. And you can take a look at the PDFs and you can see, one has a red background, one has a blue background. And that's the only visible difference, but there's more going on inside of the file.
I mean, there's no question that what they're demonstrating is that what was previously theoretical becomes more practical. But I'm a little uneasy about calling it a practical attack. The demonstration that they provided is a practical demonstration, but in a very limited context. And so I think it's really important to take the context into account. In this case, it's replicating a document. So if you wanted to forge a document, that's one thing. But in many cases where SHA is used, like say SSL certificates, you'd have to have a real-time attack. They've demonstrated a practical hash collision. You still don't necessarily have a practical attack that can be conducted. We should inspire more organizations to make sure they get it phased out, but I wouldn't be panicking, in my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree?
I do agree, although I think that we've had enough warning about SHA-1 that this is maybe too late to be saying it, but I think most people should have moved off of it by now. To me right now, if someone came out and was able to do this with any other kind of document, maybe if they could do it with a certificate, like a X509 certificate for like a website, that would be a big deal for me, to show that I can do this attack and it's not constrained to a particular file format that I have very strict control over. That's a huge deal.
So when I first saw the report, the Akamai report, I was thinking this really validates all the stuff we've been talking about on the show for at least the past year ourselves.
So I'm kind of curious, have you looked at the report?
Yeah, and it does kind of, like you said, validate a lot of stuff that we've been seeing and that we talk about week after week repetitively, but they kind of distill it all down into a nice summarized report.
Are we going to repeat it again?
We probably will.
Okay.
But, unsurprisingly, they mention DNS and NTP up near the top in terms of being part of Reflection distributed DDoS service. And then they have UDP fragment is really the largest one. As we know, those things can kind of generate UDP fragments.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, most of it is because of the DNS activity using the the EDS 0 extension. Is that right, Nimrod?
Among other things, yeah. It's it lets the extensions let you do a lot of different tricks with DNS, including putting the original host requester in the query. So you can do better geolocation, things like that. But it does cause bigger packets, bigger responses, bigger queries.
eDNS 0 is actually an extension that was put on DNS to facilitate implementation of DNSSEC, which is really a capability to be able to assign DNS responses and improve the security, your ability to trust DNS responses.
I guess the one other thing from the report that I thought was interesting, they do have a section with a bar chart here that shows DDoS attacks greater than 300 gigabits between mid-2014 to the end of 2016. And it includes the Mirai, Bill Gates botnet, Kaiten, XOR, which we just talked about, and Spike involved. And those are all IoT-based botnets. They really dominated in terms of their impact in the entire report of what was contributing to most of the DDoS attacks. So there's no other botnets that have generated more than 300 gigabits of traffic other than IoT-based, these little embedded Linux-based botnets. So it's really, kind of letting you know that this is the problem space right now.
When we talk about IoT devices, whether you're referring to Internet of Things or Internet of Toys, you still have to have security controls on those devices. And so if the passwords don't get set, it doesn't matter what security features are in there. A default password is going to get compromised.
The Internet Weather Report is actually, I think, one of the most valuable parts of the show. It gives users a really good perspective of what's been going on the internet, because we actually do have really good visibility of, in general, what's been going on the internet. Even though we don't see all of it, we see a really good representative sample.
I wanted to just give you a little idea of what's been going on for the last week or so here, John.
All right.
And not really any significant surprises. It's interesting that port 53 UDP jumped up several slots over the last week here. You know, I took a look at that, and it really wasn't anything significant. It might have been just sort of the luck of the draw, because it is kind of pretty spiky, that activity, the scanning activity on port 53. But, you know, as we've been seeing for weeks and weeks and weeks now, port 23 at the top of the list. You know, I think the Akamai State of the Internet report also sort of indicated the same thing. We'll take a look at it a little bit later, but
we're seeing the same kinds of things other people are seeing, and hopefully we give you, since we do this every week, we give you a little bit more of an in-depth analysis than they can cover in a once-a-year report.
Looking at the most sources doing the probing, wow, port 23 way up there. Even though we've seen a significant reduction in the number, you know, just the quantity of sources that are doing the probing, and the number of probes at port 23 is still way up at the top here. And then notice here on port 22, that's SSH, that's jumped up about 10 spots. Yeah.
There are a lot of IoT devices that have not yet been scooped up on SSH, and maybe that's what's driving some of that up.
Yep. All right, so let's take a look at, so this is scan sources on port 53. So what I've done here is I cheated a little bit. I have averaged this data over 48 hours because it's really, really spiking. So you can kind of see, and this is looking over 90 days, but you can kind of see where there's been an increase in activity over the last several days, past week or so.
Maybe, yeah.
And but it's not. I mean, I don't know that anybody would behave any differently. I mean, you really have to pay attention to when you put DNS servers on the internet.
Right. You don't want to be a recursive resolver on the internet, because you just open yourself up to be part of reflective denial of service attacks.
Right. Right. And you know, authoritative servers by definition have to be on the internet.
Right.
But
they should only be authoritative, or they should only be answering DNS queries for domains that they're authoritative for, which should be a small, it depends on who you are, but relatively small pool.
All right.
One thing to pay attention to from this week's Internet Weather Report is probably the same thing I would say every week, or for the past about half a year, is all this telnet scanning and SSH scanning. Pay close attention.
Looking at port 22, you know, we noticed that this is the number of sources that are scanning on port 22. Looking over the last 120 days, so it's essentially 4 months of activity here, and you can see it's really jumped up again. And you know, if we go back further in time, I had taken a look at that, and this is really where we see this this was around January 13th or so, where it kind of peaked out, and we see this resurgence of activity. So somebody's really out.
Yeah, somebody just triggered it up again since like 3 or 4 days ago, it looks like.
Comparatively speaking, compared to the port 23 activity, we're only looking at, you know, what, 11,000 sources in a given hour, but it's still a significant number and you know, pretty aggressive activity. So I thought I'd take a little closer look. This one, we just happen to have just short of 8,000 sources, mapped them out. It's interesting here. It looks like in
there's a little hot spot there in South America.
Right. This is I think that's Ecuador.
Okay.
Is that right? And so that was interesting. It was a little hot there. Pretty hot over in actually the northern coast of China and perhaps Japan, and really high density in Europe here, and India. A little less so than you might expect in the United States, comparatively speaking.
Right.
Particularly since we're really kind of looking at it from a U.S. point of view in terms of our data.
I keep waiting to see like Antarctica show up. I just need a dot on there. We never see scan sources.
We never
north
do
or
see
south
scan
of.
sources. We occasionally see something
pole.
from Alaska. It's very rare. Looking at 7547, you know, this is the one that was attributed to that outage with Deutsche Telekom at the end of November. You know, one of the things I've noticed with this is that when it started out, it appeared to be very specific bots that were doing it, and I think it was really kind of a botnet its own. Now we're seeing an awful lot of those devices that if they're scanning port 7547, they're also scanning port 23.
Yep.
And so I think it's, I don't think you can necessarily use the fact that they're scanning on this port to say it's a CPE device that's been compromised.
No, I don't think so necessarily, but it's definitely, there's a lot of IoT bots involved
It's
in
definitely in
scanning.
that,
in
the
that
IoT
family.
botnet
Yep.
category for sure. And then this is that 5358 activity, and I think we were looking at
It's
this
still a
little bit
mystery
earlier.
to me.
Yeah.
What the real intent here is. You know, like I said, I think I said last week that there is some number, couple thousand of squid proxies in the US listening on this port. And it's most well known as this web services for devices, the SSL version of it, their secured port. But there really are, I mean, I don't think there's any exploits known. And I haven't been able to capture in our sinkholes or honeypots any of this traffic. So
Yeah.
I'm still not sure what the intent is, but when you look at the scan sources, it's definitely more IoT stuff.
Yeah,
Still
absolutely.
IoT junk, scanning
and,
for this.
You know, it's basically what web services for devices API or something like
Right,
that.
it's a window, Microsoft Windows thing.
Yeah, it's interesting the way this ramped up here. I mean, this is a sort of what we typically look for in botnet activity is a case where it looked like perhaps some experimentation around, you know, just around Christmas time to the early January, a pause where they went off and said, you know,
let's
I'm gonna
look at
work
what
on
data we
something.
got.
Right, look at what data we got, what, you know, kinds of things we could do with it. And then it looks like there's a ramp up activity and then a saturation point. So it's kind of suggestive of an indication that, you know, they're doing something, you know, building a botnet on this, but really we haven't.
Like the 7547, we kind of understand what was going on there. This, I'm not quite sure yet that I get it, but maybe someday soon, hopefully.
Yep, hopefully. And I guess the last thing I wanted to just share with you, this is looking at the last 2 years of activity associated with reflective DDoS activity.
Right.
Now, it's not absolutely exclusive, but when you put it into perspective, there's the volume of activity that's here. It's the DDoS activity that really, you know, basically trumps the other things.
Right,
So because
trumps
we're
all
looking
the
at
legit stuff.
Right, we're looking at most of where the legit activity is in DNS. So this top band here, that's fragmented packets. So it would be a case where DNS responses were too big to fit into a single packet, so they get split into multiple packets and they show up basically as fragmented packets.
Right.
And then this next band here, the dark green, is DNS activity.
Right.
And that's followed by NTP,
Right.
which is a good, you know, it's a good sign. This has been tailing off, the NTP attack activity. And then character generator is next. That's port 19 UDP. And then the red band at the bottom here is actually 1900 UDP, which is that simple service discovery protocol. This activity generally has been tailing off since, you know, basically the middle of the year last year. And I think it's because the botnet activity, which the IoT botnets, you know, they really started building around May. What I think has happened is the IoT botnets have become so big that they don't really have to use reflective attack vectors anymore.
Right.
They can just
They've
use
got
the
enough
devices
just
the old school
spew the internet.
SYN flooding and things like that. So this slightly more complex type of attack where you have to be able to do spoofing, you have to have servers to reflect off of, they've kind of become out of favor in favor of just compromising more and more IoT
Why bother
devices.
with the headache of trying to assemble a list of all these devices I can reflect off of if I could just send the packets right to where I want to, you know, target?
So that's it. Anything else that you expected to see?
No, but it's pretty much just what we've been seeing. So
It'd be nice to see the botnets go away.
yeah, that would be, if it could keep going down and shrink down to nothing, this report, that would be good.
Yeah, that'd be a start anyway. We're working there. You know, I think probably the most important thing to consider here, and through all of the things that we've discussed, don't go by the headline, learn something about the details, make a good judgment about what the response really needs to be made before jumping to any conclusions.